Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe, and today I'm reviewing Tellstones, the game of bluffing, memory, confusing your opponent, and basically distracting all of them. And in a second I'll go into the how to play, teaching you how to play this game, and then from there we'll go into my final thoughts, my review, what I liked, didn't like, what I can see others not liking, etc. And with that, let's go into how to play the game. So in Tellstone, what you have is you have a few traditional symbols. You have the triangle, plain and simple, the regular olden day player pawn, as well as the die, the stack of board game boxes, the Board Game Geek logo, the meeple, and the Catan hex. That's what we have over here. And in Tellstones, what you're going to do is you're going to have a few potential actions on the table, and the first action you can do is you can place. So you can say, I'm going to place a stone in the line. So for instance, we can place Catan hex in the line. Or your opponent can say, or you can take a turn going back and forth, your opponent can say, okay, great, I'm going to place this one, I'm going to place the Board Game Geek logo to the left or the right of the line. Then perhaps you sit there and say, I'm going to put the meeple in the line, and then you can turn anyone to flip it face down. So you can say, I want to flip one of these face down, I'm going to flip down the Board Game Geek logo, and then perhaps you're going to swap. So you're going to swap down the Board Game Geek logo with the meeple. Maybe your opponent sits there and says, I want to put the meeple in the line, and then maybe you want to face the meeple down, and you swap the meeple and the Catan hex. And then maybe you turn to swap these two over here. Now we know the meeple's over here. We know that the die over here. What was over here? Who really knows? We know that the regular old player pawn's over here, and the Catan hex is over here. And you're going to be going back and forth like this until at some point, maybe you add this over here, we flip this down, we swap the line of these, and we try to figure out what goes on. But at some point, one player is going to say that they are going to claim a boast. They're going to effectively say, I know the entire line. At that point, when that happens, you have one of three actions available to you. You can either say, I believe you, in which case they gain a point. You can say, I don't believe you, in which case they have to prove it, and if they are right, if they are correct, they win the game. Or you can say, who cares, I know the line too, at which point they have the same options in turn. They can either give you the point, or say, I don't believe you, forcing you to prove it, and in which case you'll win the game. So the nice thing is, off the bat, at any point a player can win the game, even if one player is ahead. And you basically have you're playing till 3 points, or until someone wins a boast that they were called on. And so that is ultimately Tellstones. It's a memory game combined with distraction, combined with a degree of bluffing, and that's basically it. And with that, let's go into my review. And so that was Tellstone. As you can see, it's a pretty simple game, pretty easy to understand, to go through the sequencing, and really it's about the game state that the game creates. It's about two players, two people locked head to head, trying to figure out who has the better memory, who's better at bluffing, who has that recall, the distraction of trying to figure out pointing you there so you look there while I do this and I figure out that. It has a lot of those elements together, and let's go into what I liked, didn't like, what I can see being a problem for others, and of course my final thoughts. And to start with, the price point in this game is fantastic. With the coins you have over here, you're coming in at a solid $1.80 to get basically everything. Maybe a little more to get the pouch as well and the permanent marker, of course. And secondly, the components. For what you get, for $1.80, you're getting premium metal coins at a fraction of the cost that other games bring to the table. I mean, seriously, the components here, do you know how much people pay for metal coins in most games? It's usually $20, $30 to get a set of metal coins in whatever your favorite game is. And over here in Tellstones, it comes in at $1.80 for the whole game, metal coins included. I'm beyond impressed. I mean, this goes back to Riot Games has done a fantastic job bringing premium components to the table at a fraction of what other companies manage to do. And then thirdly, what I liked is I like the defined structure of the rules, how they create the game, because you may have notice as you were watching that there's really no game here. This is just a memory game. There's nothing else going on. And yet the defined structure of the rules, the rule set that Riot Games puts together, manages to create a gameplay experience that actually works. It's a gameplay experience which has elements of bluffing, elements of memory while not being a full memory game, elements of talking to your opponent and distracting them just enough while you go through the game. Sure, it's a few things here and a few things there, but then you can just rattle things off. You ever tried interrupting someone while they're counting? 1, 2, 3, 94, 11, 2, just go back and forth while someone's in the middle of counting things up and distracting them. This game will have that in spades as you point to the different coins in the line and be like, well, I know that the die is here and the meeple's here, and I know that the Board Game Geek logo is here. All these different things, even though you're lying while you do it, or are you? Are you distracting them? Maybe you rattle off a list of the entire line, and then once you've done that, say, and now I'm going to call the line. Now I'm going to push the end game. And maybe I'm right, maybe I'm not. The game does bring a lot of game because of how simple the structure is and how well it works while you're doing that. Which brings us to what I didn't like. And the first thing is kind of exactly the opposite of everything I just said, which is the gameplay is fairly weak. At the end of the day, this is a memory game. If you can lock down the aspect of the memory aspect, if you can lock that down, that's it, the game's over. The distraction and bluffing do provide a bit of a counter to the memory, but at the end of the day, if you can get your memory locked in, if you can remember what's on the table, there is no game here. It's just going to be the sequencing. Now, while the game still manages to work a little bit, is most of the time you can get a little bit of an edge in there and undercut what your opponent thinks is happening. But at the end of the day, it's just a memory game. Secondly, while I did just go on about how good the components are and for the price point, at the same time, you could have gotten away with a lot less than $1.80 for this game. You ever punch out a board game and you have those extra little blank chits? You could just grab a permanent marker, write on those, and you can have a game of Tellstones prepped and ready for under like 20 cents or something like that. And so, while the gameplay components, while they are fairly premium given the cost, I still can't help but feel you could have gotten a cheaper version of this game if you just tried a little harder. And so for that, I mean, again, pros and cons. As far as what I can see others not liking, first of all is again, what I just said, I can see others wanting an even more premium version, and it's my understanding that Riot Games is selling one if you are interested. I'll include a link down below in the description down below, but I believe Riot Games has an even more premium version than this, which is pretty nice. I mean, again, I'm pretty impressed with this version as it is. And secondly is I kind of feel that the symbols could have been more fantasy themed. I mean, I get having just a bunch of board game stuff, you know, a player piece, a meeple, all these different generic playing pieces that are related to board games. I kind of wish they had gone with more of, like, say, a fantasy setting, something that would draw you in a bit more, because especially something like the Board Game Geek logo, I mean, while that's great for you and I who are used to playing board games, I mean, for someone who doesn't know what this is, I mean, it could have been a sword or a hammer or a set of scales or something a little bit more, you know, universally accessible for people who aren't as familiar with traditional board game icons as you and I might be. Which brings me to my final thoughts on Tellstones. And my final thoughts are, well, it's pretty simple. While Tellstones does provide a fairly premium game at a very reasonable price point, and while Riot Games has an even more premium version available if you want to get that, at the end of the day, I think that Tellstones is a combination of memory, bluffing, and distraction. And I think there are better games in each of those categories. Tellstones is not bad, to be clear. It's not a bad gameplay experience, but nor is it a particularly amazing one either. It's two people sitting there trying to distract each other, and also relies heavily on memory, which takes away a lot of the strategy of a board game if one player just has a better memory than the other. So the way I would put this is, if you like the idea of a memory game, I highly recommend Leo the Lion. Leo the Lion is a cooperative memory game that takes that aspect of memory in games, but makes it a cooperative experience so you're not being punished for one player having a better memory than the other. I recommend it. It's definitely a family weight game. It's not for a bunch of adults, although by all means try it out if you want, but I think Leo the Lion is a game that does memory and does memory well. As far as bluffing, there are so many other things I can choose. I'll just rattle off a few here. There's Skull, there's Cockroach Poker, Sheriff of Nottingham. All three of those experiences, all three of those experiences will offer you a significantly better bluffing game where there's more of a gameplay structure around the memory. There's more of a bluffing going on in those games, or the more pure bluffing at the core. I really recommend all of those. Again, Skull and Cockroach Poker are probably the best if you want something smaller and shorter, versus Sheriff of Nottingham is better if you want something a little more structured, a little longer. But if you like bluffing, those are all excellent choices worth checking out. And finally, if you like distraction, if you think that the distraction in games is fun, if you've played Tellstones and the idea of trying to manipulate your opponent, of pointing here while you do this there, basically being a magician, of distracting them with something or other while you actually try to achieve your master plan, then this is definitely stepping it up a level, but I highly recommend both Innis and Cyclades. Innis and Cyclades are excellent games where timing is everything, where you are going to be trying to achieve a certain winning state. You're going to want to win the board game by setting a certain board game state. In the case of Cyclades, it's winning two of these basically temples kind of structures, and in the case of Innis, it's about winning one of 3 victory conditions. But those are games where you heavily want to distract your opponent, making them think that you're doing something when you're really going to do something else, drawing out the turns, planning your moves. Those games heavily rely on distraction as a core mechanism in order to ensure that you are the one left standing and winning, as opposed to any of the other players at the table. Past that, my final thoughts really come to, like I said, Tellstones is okay. It's a great game. For a $1.80 price point, I can highly recommend it. If you want to check out the premium version, go for that. But at the end of the day, it is a fairly weak game compared to the vast variety of games you and I have access to today. Until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from BoardGameCo. I hope you enjoyed this review, and I hope you have a good one.